paradrama tales.
My parents deserted me, but appeared at Grandma's funeral. For her $50 million. Then the lawyer laughed, sealing their true intentions. How could the people who promised to love and protect me vanish when I needed them most, only to return for profit? Stay tuned to uncover the rest. I'll never forget that night, how the moon hung low over the gravel road, casting long shadows that felt as cold as my mother's silence. I was 8, clutching Mr. Buttons, my battered stuffed bear, and bracing myself for a trip to Grandma's house, a place I knew only as warmth and safety. But as our old sedan rattled to a stop, I glanced up, expecting my mother's tired smile, the one she always gave me before we stepped inside. Instead, I saw her knuckles white on the steering wheel, and my father staring straight ahead, as if I were invisible. The door clicked open, and a chill breeze swept through the cabin. I opened mine, backpack in hand, and looked back, half expecting one of them to reach out. But they stayed put. My mother's voice finally broke the quiet. "We just need a little time to sort things out, Allison. Be a good girl and stay with Grandma." No hug, no explanation. Just those words, as final as a slammed door. I nodded, because that's what I knew to do, and stepped onto the gravel. Grandma's porch light glowed like a beacon, and for a moment, I thought I could chase after them, catch the car before it disappeared. But the engine turned over, and the sedan rolled away, leaving only its taillights fading into darkness. No one waved. No one looked back. The crunch of wheels on gravel became the only sound I heard until it too faded. My heart thudded, but the tears didn't come immediately. I was too stunned to cry. Inside, Grandma wrapped me in her arms, her own tears muffled into my hair. I realized then that she understood without needing words. She led me to the kitchen, where the scent of chamomile tea and fresh chicken noodle soup should have comforted me. But my stomach felt hollow. She sat across from me, spooning soup into my bowl. But I barely touched it. Instead, I stared at the window, waiting for headlights. Any sign that they would return. The night stretched on, each minute heavier than the last. I lay in bed clutching Mr. Buttons, watching the ice crystals form on the window pane, imagining each one as a frozen promise they might keep. The next morning, I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, counting every car that passed. My little heart leaped with each engine, only to sink when it drove on. 2 hours, 4 hours, then a full day without a word. I asked Grandma once, "When will they come back?" And she simply sat beside me, patting my back. "They'll come when they're ready," she whispered. But I sensed her words were more for me than for hope. Days turned into a week. Grandma's routines offered a fragile structure. Breakfast at 7, soup at noon, story time at dusk. But between each ritual, the silence loomed. At school, I became the quiet girl who never spoke of her parents. My classmates asked questions. "Where are your mom and dad?" And I shrugged, letting the subject die. Inside, I felt the gnawing question. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough to keep them here? Psychologists say that sudden abandonment at a young age can imprint like a burn, teaching the mind that love is conditional, that safety is fleeting. I learned that lesson beneath your grandmother's steady gaze and in the hollow echo of my own footsteps down empty hallways. Yet, even as fear and confusion crowded in, a small ember of resilience flickered. Grandma taught me through her actions that love could be quiet but unbreakable. Each bedtime story, each gentle pat, was a lesson in trust rebuilt. That night, as I lay awake for hours, staring at the dark ceiling, I realized something. I was not alone. I had Grandma, and she would not leave. The next morning, I still watched the road, but now with a different question. Not when will they return, but what will I become if I stay? And in that question, the first seeds of strength were planted. They may have deserted me that night, but they could never erase what Grandma's love had sown into my heart. And I knew, even then, that the journey ahead, through betrayal, discovery, and eventually triumph, would begin on that gravel road beneath the indifferent stars. Grandma's house felt like stepping into a warm embrace. The moment I crossed her threshold, the chill of abandonment slipped away, replaced by the gentle glow of lamplight and the soft hum of kitchen appliances. Shelves lined with dog-eared novels and framed sepia photographs whispered of decades of history. But it was the little details. Chamomile tea steeping in a porcelain pot, the aroma of fresh chicken noodle soup drifting through the air, that declared this place a sanctuary. As Grandma bustled about her familiar routines, I watched her transform a simple afternoon into a lesson in unspoken love. She moved with quiet purpose, sliding a steaming bowl across the table, tucking a lace doily under my teacup, patting my shoulder before returning to her bookkeeping. Her modest home, with scuffed hardwood floors and faded wallpaper, held a dignity that no amount of wealth could buy. When I finally lifted the spoon to my lips, her eyes met mine over her glasses, and I understood that nourishment was more than food. It was a promise that I mattered. Each evening, at precisely 7 o'clock, she read aloud from a battered storybook. Tales of foxes finding courage, children discovering kindness in strangers, heroes rising from hardship. Her voice never wavered, even when her hands trembled slightly on the page. Studies show that rhythmic storytelling soothes an anxious mind, anchoring a child's emotions even when words are tagged onto frightening memories. And I clung to her cadence like a lifeline. After the story, she would kneel beside my bed, smoothing the patchwork quilt and adjusting my pillow. "Sleep well, my brave girl," she'd whisper, her voice a soft caress. I learned that safety sometimes arrives not in grand gestures, but in consistent small acts. A tucking-in ritual repeated night after night until fear loses its grip. In those moments, I felt my heart exhale, trading panic for peace. Mornings brought another quiet ritual. She brewed coffee for herself and hot cocoa for me, setting 2 mugs on the windowsill to catch the sunrise. We'd sit side by side, watching the light inch across her garden. I remember how she would pause to whisper facts about the world. A cluster of bees pollinating lavender, the way frost crystals form on grass, and weave them into our conversation. Science says that understanding one's environment fosters a sense of control. In Grandma's garden classroom, even complex ideas felt gentle and familiar. On laundry days, I helped her fold clothes just so, learning patience with each crease. She explained that caring for our belongings meant caring for ourselves, that order in our surroundings could restore order in our hearts. I realized how her methodical folding mirrored her steadiness. No matter how my thoughts tumbled, she shaped them into calm. Between chores, she'd guide me to the wooden rocker on her porch. There, beneath the sheltering roof and beside pots of lavender, she taught me the power of silence. We'd rock in companionable quiet, listening to chickadees and the distant toll of the church bell. Some lessons aren't spoken. I learned that love doesn't always fill the air with words, but with presence. Grandma's sanctuary also held room for tears. When sorrow caught me in a rare moment, She simply handed me a handkerchief, held my hand, and let me be. Research into trauma recovery emphasizes the importance of validation, acknowledging pain without rushing to fix it. She embodied that principle, letting me mourn without judgment until I was ready to smile again. As the days stretched on, something remarkable happened. The raw ache of being deserted softened into a memory framed by hope. I discovered that a home is more than walls. It is the safety we feel when another's consistency outweighs our fears. In Grandma's quiet sanctuary, I found more than shelter. I found a blueprint for resilience, learning that true strength grows in soil rich with understanding, routine, and unwavering care. And though my parents' car would never return down that gravel road, Grandma's gentle rhythms taught me that love could be both silent and indestructible, anchoring a little girl's heart when she needed it most. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps returning, every rustle of leaves, an engine's hum. Wrapped in Grandma's quilt, I stared at the dark ceiling, my mind replaying the moment my parents drove away. My heart thudded with each image of their taillights blinking back into view. And I clutched Mr. Buttons so tightly, his button eye threatened to pop off. At first, I told myself they were simply delayed. Maybe a flat tire or an emergency I couldn't understand. But as the hours dragged on, each tick of the clock unspooled hope a little more. 1 became 2, then 3. My small chest tightened with a question I couldn't shake. Were they ever coming back? I padded down to the living room and pressed my palm against the cold window pane. The gravel driveway stretched empty beneath the moonlight. No car, no silhouette, just the silent hush of the night. I remembered Grandma's words from our kitchen table. Waiting is the hardest part of hope. I had never understood that until now. Morning light crawled through the curtains too soon. I blinked awake on the quilt's edge, my face pressed into the faint lavender scent. Grandma stirred beside me, then slipped quietly to the window where I still stood. She didn't ask why I hadn't slept. Instead, she placed a teacup in my hand and sank onto the rocker. We watched the horizon flush pink, sharing the silence. By mid-morning, I tried to join Grandma in her chores, folding laundry, watering herbs. But my mind wandered back to the driveway. "Do you think they'll come today?" I finally asked, voice small. Grandma paused, folding a pillowcase with meticulous care. She set it aside and looked at me over her glasses. "I don't know," she said softly. "But we'll make today worth your time." It wasn't the answer I'd hoped for, but in her gentle refusal to lie, there was honesty I could respect. She taught me then that truths we don't like can still be bearable when spoken kindly. At school, I struggled to concentrate. Numbers danced on the chalkboard, but I barely registered them. My teacher's voice became distant, like a radio halfway off the dial. When someone asked about my parents, I shrugged and said, "They're taking care of something important." No one pressed further. I was the quiet girl in the back row, and I welcomed the invisibility. Back home, Grandma greeted me at the door with hot cocoa. She let me spill my worries, every what if and why me. And she offered no quick fixes or empty promises. Instead, she listened, nodding, her presence steady. I felt seen in a way I hadn't since they left. Days turned into a loop. Wake, watch the road, pretend at school, return, share in chores, lie awake again. My doubt grew like ivy, creeping into every corner of my mind. Why had they abandoned me? What had I done to deserve this? I began to suspect there was a truth darker than simple neglect. One evening, as we shelved Grandma's financial newspapers, I glimpsed the headlines she'd read so religiously. Stock tickers, market trends. She once told me that knowing how money works meant freedom. But that night, I wondered if freedom was also the power to walk away. I held her hand. It trembled slightly. "Grandma, do you think they don't love me anymore?" I whispered. She paused, then squeezed my fingers. "Sometimes people aren't ready for the love you give," she said. "That is never your fault." In that moment, my doubt and guilt twisted into something new. Resolve. If they chose to leave, it was their choice, not mine. I could not will them to stay, but I could choose how to live with their decision. That night, I lay down and finally drifted into sleep. Uneasy, but determined. The vigil had taught me that while I could not chase every taillight back, I could anchor myself in the love that remained. And in that anchor, I found the first spark of strength to face the days ahead. I was the quiet girl at Maplewood Elementary, the one who slipped into class and slid into her seat without a word. My backpack felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the weight of uncertainty, or the leftover chill from that night on Grandma's porch. I kept my head down during roll call, letting classmates chat about weekend adventures and family vacations that felt like stories from another world. When they asked, "Where are your parents?" I managed a soft shrug and a quick change of subject, pretending their absence was no big deal. Inside, my chest tightened each time I heard laughter or saw a photo of smiling moms and dads on bulletin boards. During lessons, I stared at the teacher's lips, forming words I heard but couldn't absorb. Math problems danced around in my head, yet I couldn't remember the first thing about multiplication tables. The bell at recess felt like both a promise and a threat. Freedom from the classroom, but also a gauntlet of playground chatter. I perched on a bench, tracing patterns in the wood grain, convincing myself that if I stayed still enough, I'd go unnoticed. My hands itched to wave back when someone greeted me, but the fear of awkward silence held me frozen. After a week of empty glances and whispered questions, my teacher, Mrs. Harper, asked to speak with Grandma. I watched from my desk as she called Grandma's number, her voice tinged with concern. The next afternoon, Grandma arrived carrying 2 steaming mugs of hot cocoa and that same calm smile she wore at home. She didn't lecture me about participation or force me to share. Instead, she sat beside me on the bench under the old oak by the playground, handed me a mug, and asked if I liked marshmallows. I nodded, surprised at how normal it felt to be offered a choice. We sipped quietly as Rusty's swing sighed in the breeze. Mrs. Harper approached, hesitating, then confessed she was worried that I'd stopped talking, stopped laughing, stopped being Allison. Grandma listened without interrupting, then simply said, "She's finding her way." That was all she said. No pressure to explain, no eager promises to fix everything. Just a statement that gave Mrs. Harper enough room to breathe, and me enough courage to raise my eyes and manage a faint smile. Later that evening, Grandma asked if I felt any better. I could only shake my head and admit, "I think I'm just tired." In the days that followed, something shifted. I began to lift my gaze in class, focusing on the way sunlight streamed through the windows onto the desks. I offered a small nod back when someone greeted me, and sometimes even a single word, "Hi," that surprised us both. At home, Grandma praised every tiny step. "Progress is a journey," she said, echoing a lesson far gentler than any scolding. I realized that presence mattered more than advice, that someone watching and simply standing by you could heal wounds that words never could. By the end of the week, I had spoken up once in history class to answer a question about ancient civilizations. My voice trembled, but it was mine. Walking home, I told Grandma about it, and she squeezed my hand. "See," she whispered, "you're stronger than you know." In that moment, I understood that healing didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant finding the courage to step into the future one small word at a time. Each morning began the same way. I'd slip into the kitchen to find Grandma perched at the table, a thick financial newspaper spread before her like a sacred text. Steam curled from her chipped porcelain mug as she skimmed headlines. Market shifts, dividend announcements, real estate whispers. Her eyes bright behind wire-rimmed glasses. I watched her fingers trace the columns of numbers with reverence, and I felt a tug of curiosity. One chilly autumn morning, I finally asked, "Grandma, why do you spend every dawn reading stock tickers and bond yields?" She looked up, smiled, and patted the seat beside her. "Because," she said softly, "knowing how money moves means knowing how to keep it. And that means freedom, Allison." From that day on, she turned our kitchen into a classroom. She taught me to fold my allowance into envelopes labeled savings, needs, and wants, insisting I decide where each coin belonged. When we shopped for groceries, she handed me the list and the calculator, challenging me to find the best prices without sacrificing quality. I learned to compare brands, clip coupons, and even haggle politely at the farmer's market for extra tomatoes when they offered them. Each bargain felt like a small triumph, not just for the dollars saved, but for the confidence it gave me. Grandma's motto echoed in my head: "Control your money, or it controls you." She showed me that living within didn't mean living without. Our home remained modest, no flashy purchases, only careful choices. She repaired torn sleeves instead of buying new shirts, swapped recipes with neighbors instead of ordering takeout, and clipped coupons for candles so our rooms could glow without draining our budget. Yet behind every humble habit lay a purposeful lesson. Simplicity breeds security. I discovered that frugality, far from feeling like sacrifice, felt like empowerment. When I tucked my carefully folded clothes into drawers, I felt a sense of order settle inside me, as if each crease whispered, "You can handle this." As I grew older, Grandma introduced me to the family ledger, a leather-bound notebook where she recorded expenses, income, and the occasional windfall. She let me write down my first babysitting earnings, track the dollars my part-time job brought in, and plan how much to set aside for college applications. She explained compound interest by drawing circles on a napkin, showing how a single saved dollar could blossom into many over time. I watched her face light up when she calculated our small nest egg's growth. It was less joy in numbers than joy in potential. In her eyes, I saw that money was more than currency. It was a tool to build dreams, a shield against uncertainty, and a bridge to opportunity. Those lessons in money and freedoms shaped me in ways I couldn't yet grasp. I felt steadier, less afraid of the future, knowing I had the skills to navigate life's twists without panic. I carried Grandma's advice in my pocket like a talisman. Be curious about finance, but let your values guide your spending. Little did I know that her quiet stewardship had concealed a far greater legacy, a fortune she managed alone, hidden behind her unassuming ways. And when the time came to reveal that secret, I would discover that every lesson she taught me had been preparing me not just to survive, but to steward her incredible gift with wisdom and grace. I never expected a simple meeting in a cramped lawyer's office to upend everything I thought I knew. I sat across from Mr. Harrington, his leather chair creaking as he shuffled a thick folder stamped with my grandmother's name. The room smelled of polished wood and old parchment, and sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. My fingers trembled as I set down my cup of lukewarm water, and I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Miss Baker," he began, clearing his throat and adjusting his glasses, "your grandmother was an extraordinarily savvy investor." I braced for something modest. A savings account, maybe a small parcel of land. But his next words sent a shock through my veins. "She left you everything. The house, the land, and a portfolio currently valued at just over $50 million. $50 million. My breath caught in my throat. I must have looked pale because he paused, waiting for my reaction. "I'm sorry," I managed, voice cracking. "Did you say 50 million? He nodded solemnly, then pushed the folder across the desk so I could examine line after line of trusts, mutual funds, real estate holdings, and share certificates in early-stage companies I had never heard of. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. One page for real estate trusts worth over 10 million, another for high-yield bonds and blue-chip stocks. Then a section listing private equity stakes in a tech startup that sounded vaguely familiar. Something my grandmother had mentioned once, back when I thought she was just clipping coupons to save a few dollars at the grocery store. I felt dizzy, as if the floor had dropped out from beneath me. All those quiet mornings watching her read financial newspapers, all the times she emphasized budgeting and saving. It had been training for this moment. But I wasn't prepared for the scale of it. I tried to picture her patching curtains instead of buying new ones, clipping coupons for candles rather than choosing a pricier brand. Yet here she had been quietly growing an empire. She managed it herself for years, the lawyer explained, his voice breaking the stunned silence. Every decision was deliberately documented. Her will was updated last year, and she even recorded notarized video statements confirming that you were to receive the entire estate. She specifically disinherited any claimants, stating she did not want your parents to receive a cent. My heart pounded with a mixture of grief, awe, and a bittersweet vindication I didn't fully understand. My grandmother's humility had always masked her brilliance. The woman who never flaunted a single dollar now appeared before me as a financial titan whose legacy was entrusted entirely to me. I felt tears sting the back of my eyes as I traced her handwriting on the will, marveling at her deliberate, loving care to protect me even after her death. At that moment, I realized that every lesson she taught about money, discipline, and quiet strength had been building toward this revelation. Yet even as I absorbed the magnitude of her gift, a new thought crept in. What would my parents say? I had not invited them, and I doubted they knew the full extent of her fortune. The lawyer looked up and hesitated. "They requested to be present for the reading," he said, voice low. "Shall I call them in?" My throat tightened. I felt a surge of anger and apprehension at the thought of their grinning faces, at the sudden rush of entitlement I knew would follow once they learned of the inheritance. But first, I needed a moment alone with my grandmother's legacy. I nodded, and Mr. Harrington left to fetch them. In the hush that followed, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the leather-bound notebook where my grandmother had recorded her own daily expenses, and ran my thumb over its worn cover. I whispered a quiet thank you. To her, to the lessons she had instilled, and to the little girl I once was, clutching her quilt and her stuffed bear, striving to make sense of a world that had taken my family. Soon, footsteps approached outside the door, and I braced myself. In just a few breaths, everything would change, and I would have to decide not just how to handle $50 million, but how to honor the woman who had taught me the true value of a life lived with purpose and humility. I stood by Grandma's casket as the last hymn faded, my fingers tightening around the white lily I'd chosen. The church felt cavernous, filled with neighbors, old students, and strangers whose lives she'd touched. Yet despite the warmth of their condolences, my chest constricted when I noticed two figures at the back, my mother and father, standing side by side as if actors stepping onto a stage. Their faces were drawn, but not with grief. It was anticipation in their eyes. My heart sank. They had come, not to honor her memory, but to stake a claim. After the service, I moved through the receiving line, accepting hugs and whispered praise for Grandma's kindness. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, they lingered too close, their polite nods tinged with entitlement. My mother's hand hovered over where my shoulders should have been rested. My father's practiced smile suggested he'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. I kept my distance, focusing on Granny's handmade quilt draped across the pew, her last gift to me. A week later, I found myself in the lawyer's modest office again, the same leather chair creaking under my weight. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat and glanced at the door before letting them in. They entered with that familiar, hollow confidence, as if the $50 million figure had magically erased years of absence. My father offered, "We just want what's rightfully ours." His voice flat like a broken record. My mother's eyes flicked to the folder on the desk, hungry for the pages that spelled out my inheritance. I felt a surge of anger flare in my chest. My mother spoke first. "Your grandmother loved us too," she said, though neither of us had spoken in decades. "She wouldn't have left you everything without considering her family." Her voice quivered, but the tremor was more calculation than emotion. My father nodded, adding, "We deserve our share. Blood is thicker than water." But blood, I thought bitterly, didn't make them parents. They walked away when I was 8. Mr. Harrington settled the folder between us and cleared his throat. "As you know, Mrs. Baker updated her will last year. She left explicit instructions that all assets transfer to her granddaughter with notarized video statements declaring her intentions. There are no provisions for any other heirs." My parents' faces fell into practiced shock. My mother scoffed. This must have been under undue influence. She was ill, weak in her mind. They opened every legal tactic: undue influence, lack of capacity, procedural errors. I watched Mr. Harrington's calm responses dismantle each argument. No ambiguity, no loopholes, just ironclad documentation of her clarity and intent. My father's shoulders slumped, but his eyes remained defiant. "We'll appeal," he threatened. "We'll do whatever it takes." My mother leaned forward, voice calmer now. "We're family," she whispered. Surely she didn't mean to cut us out completely. Their pleas echoed hollowly in the sterile office. I realized then that their love had always been conditional, dependent on what they stood to gain. When they left, slamming the door behind them, I sank into the chair, trembling. Though vindicated by Grandma's foresight, I felt a strange loneliness. I was the only one who truly understood her devotion. the only one worthy of her legacy. I closed my eyes and saw her gentle smile, her hands guiding mine over ledgers and storybooks, refusing to crumble even as she built a secret fortune. In the days that followed, rumors swirled around town. My parents, painting themselves as grieving heirs, denied their rightful legacy, while I kept silent, refusing interviews or sympathy votes. They chased headlines. I focused on honoring Grandma's memory. I decided then I would protect her gift, not let their greed sully her name. Their return had exposed the real cost of abandonment, but it had also illuminated my purpose, to use her fortune with the same quiet integrity she had exemplified. And so, as I locked the lawyer's office behind me one last time, I felt something settle deep inside. The resolve to safeguard not just the money, but the values Grandma had instilled, the very essence of her quiet sanctuary. In her memory, I would transform their greed into generosity, proving that true family is built not by blood, but by the love and trust we choose to give. I stood on the creaky front porch as the last guests drifted away from our first legacy dinner, a monthly gathering Grandma had dreamed of and we had brought to life. The long table under the wisteria-draped pergola was strewn with homemade bread, steaming bowls of vegetable stew, and mason jars brimming with wildflower arrangements. Simple touches that reminded me of her quiet hospitality. Children laughed in the garden, chasing fireflies. Grandparents swapped stories on the porch swing. Neighbors lingered under lantern light, feasting and reminiscing. In that moment, I realized that Grandma's true fortune wasn't hidden in account statements. It was in the bonds she nurtured and the love she sowed. With the scholarship fund she left in my name, I'd awarded grants to students raised by relatives or in foster care, kids who, like me, had once felt unseen. Mariah, the shy teenager who reminded me so much of myself at 13, was the first recipient. I watched her eyes fill with hope as she clutched the acceptance letter. Her quiet determination mirrored my own, and I knew Grandma would have been proud. The scholarship dinners became a celebration of resilience. Each recipient, a testament to what love and a little support can achieve. Inside the house, I kept every worn paperback and gardening tool she cherished, but renovated the kitchen to accommodate communal meals. The old oak floors, once patched and scuffed, were sanded smooth, yet left to bear their honest marks. Just as Grandma taught me that life's imperfections make it real. On the wall above the stove, I hung her faded ledger, now preserved beneath glass, a tribute to the lessons in thrift and wisdom she recorded in careful script. Each morning, I continued Grandma's ritual of reading the financial pages, not to amass wealth, but to steward it. I met with advisors, real, trustworthy people, to ensure the trust she created endured. I turned down flashy investment schemes and focused on community development. Grants for literacy programs, microloans for elderly caregivers, and support for local artisans. In every decision, I heard her voice. Freedom is knowing your values guide your choices. Beyond finances, I mentored dozens of students at the community center. We discussed college applications, budgeting, and the courage to dream. I shared stories of lavender patches and bedtime tales, of broken promises and unwavering support. Watching these young faces light up with possibility reminded me that Grandma's legacy was not a finite fortune, but a multiplier of hope, passed from one life to another. On weekends, I tended the garden she once loved, now bursting with lavender and rosemary. I hosted workshops for neighbors, teaching them how to grow herbs, bake bread, and preserve memories in jars, just as she preserved her journals of recipes and reflections. As I guided a group of retirees through pruning rose bushes, I felt Grandma's presence in the gentle rhythm of petals falling and new buds emerging. In quiet moments, I'd retreat to the reading nook she built, clutching her last letter, where she reminded me that I was her greatest joy and that abandonment had nothing to do with my worth. I read those words when I faced doubt and when I needed courage to face angry legal appeals from my parents. Each, "I hope you're proud of me," slipped from my lips like a promise kept. Years have passed, and the house remains a living tapestry of her life. The lavender field still sways in summer breezes. The library nook still holds her manuscript of memories. The community dinners still kindle laughter and shared stories under the stars. And though Grandma is gone, her love endures. In every heart touched, every life uplifted, and every seed of generosity planted in her name. In building this legacy of love, I discovered that true wealth lies not in the size of an inheritance, but in the depth of connections we forge. And I carry her lessons forward, determined to ensure her quiet sanctuary forever blossoms in the world. I still feel her presence in every corner of this home. The lavender-scented breeze that drifts through the windows, the soft creak of the rocking chair on the porch, the gentle echo of her "Sleep well, my brave girl," in my dreams. Grandma taught me that love isn't measured by grand gestures, but by unwavering consistency. The daily rituals, the unspoken assurances, the little lessons that shape our very souls. From the night my parents drove away to the moment I learned of her $50 million legacy, she guided me with quiet strength, showing me that true freedom lies in knowing your worth and in sharing that worth with others. Today, as I stand beneath the wisteria at our monthly legacy dinners, watching children who were once overlooked laugh like they belong, I understand her final gift. Not the fortune itself, but the power to transform loss into love, abandonment into opportunity, and pain into purpose. If you've ever felt left behind or underestimated, remember that your greatest inheritance can be the kindness you pass on. Share this story with someone who needs hope, so they too can find courage in the simplest acts. A warm meal, a listening ear, a promise kept. If Grandma's journey moved you, hit like and subscribe for more real-life tales of resilience and grace. And in the comments below, tell us, who was your quiet hero, steering you through life's storms? Your story might inspire someone else to plant seeds of love in unexpected places. Because in the end, our legacies aren't defined by what we accumulate, but by how we uplift each other. From broken hearts, whole communities can grow. And from one grandmother's humble wisdom, a world of compassion can bloom. So stay with us, and let's keep building those legacies together.